your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition with Jeanette Roche.
Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. Thanks so much for joining us for a look back at what made headlines in Alberta this week. A summit tackling toxic masculinity in hockey began Friday in Calgary. The two-day Beyond the Boards Summit aims to tackle a root cause identified at the heart of racism, sexism, homophobia, discrimination, and exclusion in hockey. Some of the discussions will touch on how masculinity is defined in hockey, including glorifying toughness and violence, the quote bro culture, and the quote code of the locker room. Among these scheduled speakers are Sports Minister Carla Qualtrough and Sheldon Kennedy, a former NHL player and survivor of sexual abuse in junior hockey. Hundreds of thousands of students headed back to class this week, but a new report by the Alberta government does not paint a pretty picture for post-secondary students. The study, which was completed by Leger, says 50% of students surveyed said they have reported some form of sexual or gender-based violence. This is slightly higher than the Alberta average of 43%. Leger surveyed students from 26 publicly funded post-secondary institutions from January 30th through March 16th of this year. The survey received close to 13,000 responses, representing a reply rate of 5.8%. Staff at the University of Lethbridge Students' Union are not happy with the numbers. They want Advanced Education Minister Rajan Sawhney to address the issue.
We are calling on the government and the ministry to provide some funding to implement safe sexual violence prevention centers on our campus. Right now at the U of L, we only have one person that is helping with sexual violence prevention, and one person can't do it alone. We need a team. Given the numbers that we're seeing here, 50%, half of students on our campus are saying that they're experiencing some form of sexual violence here. So I do believe that the government needs to provide some funding and intervention and supports for different PSIs around Alberta to have these centers and to be able to have students access these centers in a safe manner.
Bridge City News reached out to the office of Minister Sawhney for a comment. A statement was sent to us which reads in part, on February 21st of 2022, Alberta's government announced $2.5 million in funding to support gender-based violence prevention on campus, including, but not limited to, training, awareness, and updating and implementing more supports for survivors on campus. A portion of this funding was also used to develop and conduct a student survey and create the report released. A police task force set up on the Blood Reserve here in southwestern Alberta is having a lot of success in shutting down drug trafficking in our region. The number of overdoses on the reserve also continues to drop.
So in April, we started a drug task force unit, and I was fortunate to be a part of that. We were able to have quite an impact on the community. Definitely police presence is a thing. It causes people to be aware of what they're doing, but really the stats speak for themselves. We went from about 26 overdoses a month down to 5 or 6 after several major arrests.
A Lethbridge woman who stabbed a hostage multiple times last year was sentenced to 10 years in prison in Lethbridge Court. In July of 2022, Courtney Louise Shaw went into Lethbridge Legal Guidance and asked to speak to a lawyer. She was told the attorney wasn't available, and that's when she pointed a firearm at 2 employees and threatened to kill them. She then took worker Catherine Linder hostage and stabbed her in the neck numerous times. Linder miraculously survived the whole ordeal. Shaw pleaded guilty last month to several charges, including pointing a firearm, using a firearm while committing an offense, taking a hostage, and aggravated assault. She was given 628 days credit against her sentence for the time she's already served. ACERT, or the Alberta Serious Incident Response Team, is investigating the circumstances of a 31-year-old woman who died while in Lethbridge Police custody. The police say the intoxicated woman was arrested back on September 1st for aggravated assault. Following a medical check by EMS, she was taken to hospital but was then released back into police custody the following day. She was placed in a holding cell where she was later found dead. ACERT investigators arrived in Lethbridge on September 2nd, where the investigation is ongoing. After the break, the number of daycare-aged children affected from E. coli went up just before the weekend in Calgary, and Alberta opens its first lithium extraction pilot project. All that is next. Keep it right here. Welcome back. The number of children affected by E. coli climbed just before the weekend in Calgary. Alberta Health Services declared an E. coli outbreak at 6 daycares in Calgary and at least 5 other sites that shared a central kitchen. By Friday morning, there were 128 lab-confirmed cases, with 25 children having to be admitted to hospital. At least 3 of them have been discharged. Some of the facilities which have been ordered to close include daycare locations at Braeside, Bridgeland, Centennial, McKnight, along with Kids Space and Vic Academy in Okotoks. They were ordered to remain closed until all issues are resolved. Families with kids who attend the locations were sent letters cautioning them of the outbreak. Alberta has opened its first lithium extraction pilot project. Chris Dornbos, CEO of E3 Lithium, says the occasion is the start of a new era for the province's traditionally oil and gas dominated economy. Lithium, a light metal, is in high demand around the world because it's a key component in electric vehicle batteries. The world's biggest lithium producers are Australia, Chile, and China, but it has been long known that Alberta is home to one of the world's largest lithium deposits. This year's dry conditions have been difficult in terms of crop yields for many southern Alberta farmers. David Bishop, director of Alberta Grains, says crop yields are about a quarter to half below normal. Bishop says the dry conditions not only affect crop farmers, but also cattle ranchers.
There's no pasture, very little pasture, so they're having to downsize the herd and so forth. So it's more than just the grain side of it. It's basically all of agriculture in the southern part of the province. Agriculture is a pretty big economic driver in Alberta, and as a producer, we like to upgrade equipment, expand and so forth. But in the last few years, with our crops being underperforming because of dry weather, it's a hurt on all of this.
Stats Canada says at the end of August, 59% of the country was classified as abnormally dry. The Alberta government announced a new $27.3 million investment to support growth of innovative research at our province's post-secondary schools. Officials say the funding will help accelerate research and commercialization in the areas of medical devices, electronic health, clean energy, along with space and defense technologies.
This funding announcement today is going to help to drive that research even further forward, continuing to build on the momentum that we are seeing in Alberta's tech sector. We have seen Alberta leading the country in terms of venture capital investment growth. At a time when investment in other provinces is on a downward trajectory, we continue to see growth. That is great news, folks. It is great news telling us that Alberta's tech sector is booming. It is growing. The momentum is more exciting than we've ever seen it before, and I'm confident that investments like today's $27.3 million announcement will continue to drive that forward.
The Alberta government announced a cash infusion of close to $3 million to increase wages of frontline workers in the province. Officials say the funding will also help to support those with FASD or fetal alcohol spectrum disorder.
This funding supports, on average, a 10% wage increase for frontline FASD workers. Like many industries, the social services sectors has been experiencing workforce challenges for some time.
City halls around the province, like this one in Lethbridge, were lit up red this past week as part of FASD Awareness Month. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is a disability that impacts the brain and body of those who were exposed to alcohol during fetal development. According to the Alberta government, an estimated 4% of Canadians have FASD, and this means that around 174,000 Albertans have the developmental disability. Well, the criminal trials involving a Medicine Hat woman who helped organize the Freedom Convoy has begun in Ottawa. Tamara Leach and Chris Barber of Swift Current, Saskatchewan are co-accused of mischief and encouraging others to commit mischief, obstructing police and intimidation. The duo organized a large convoy of trucks into the nation's capital last year to protest against the federal government's COVID-19 restrictions. But political reporter Brian Lilly says it appears to be a lot of political theater and a strong show of force by the Trudeau government.
This is a show of force by the government, just like they used to show of force on the Emergencies Act. I'm split on the Freedom Convoy. I know some people love it, think it was the best thing ever. I said to you at the time, look, they made their point. They should have left earlier. But I was against the Emergencies Act. I find this whole thing to be a bit of theater from a time that most of us have forgotten. We've moved on from the pandemic. We've moved on from the restrictions the convoy was fighting. But the people prosecuting this have not.
And it's not just the prosecutors who haven't moved on. There are still several Alberta men facing charges for their involvement in a separate COVID restriction protest at the Coutts border. We speak with one of them after the break. Stay with us. The Coutts border blockade captured national headlines in 2022 for its protests against COVID restrictions. One of the organizers of it was Fort Macleod Town Councillor Marco Van Hugenbos. He currently faces mischief charges and shares with BCN's Hal Roberts what could be the potential outcome of those charges and why he's still allowed to continue his duties as a town councillor.
Now, you, along with Alex Van Herk, also Fort Macleod, and Gerard Jansen of Tabor, all face charges of mischief over $5,000. If you're found guilty, you could face a maximum of 10 years in prison. How concerned are you with this?
Well, the reality of the charges has come home. It's a serious charge. Like you just mentioned, if convicted, the maximum penalty could be 10 years. I believe the Crown is they proceeded with direct indictment. I believe in discussions that have been had that they're looking for 3 to 4 years. But again, the case is ahead of us. The trial is ahead of us, and of course, it would be concerning if I were to speak frankly and in relation to my family. If I go to jail, if I'm convicted and go to jail for any length of time, that would have that would be an extremely difficult situation for myself and my family. But I'll be honest, that's not something we're focused on at this point. I believe that we have a valid opportunity, and the case and the trial ahead of us will allow us to dispute the charges that have been thrown at us. And it's sort of a stepped approach. At this point, we look to trial, and based on trial, we will reevaluate and look at next steps.
So, Marco, while all of this is going on, are you allowed to continue with your duties as a town councillor in Fort Macleod, or have you had to step aside?
No, I'm allowed to continue. There was complaints leveled against me, but the MGA, the Municipal Government Act, did not have any authority, or did not have any bylaw, or I was not in. I did not contravene the MGA. I have a letter of. I was disciplined with a letter from council in relation to the public role that I did participate in during the Coutts blockade. But as of right now, I'm still a sitting second-term councillor for the town of Fort Macleod.
So can you explain to our viewers, Marco, exactly what you were fighting for during the Coutts blockade?
We were fighting against government overreach. I've said this so many times. The COVID years, the early COVID years, pre-Coutts blockade, we lost the ability to communicate with those who represent us. And to be quite frank, even those who represented us did not have the ability to do that. We were being governed by a PIC committee, by the EMCC Emergency Management Cabinet Committee. And we've now seen in the last month, or I believe it was 5-6 weeks ago, the Ingram decision ruled against the authority that the EMCC had. That's not saying that things would have been different, but provincially we stood up against a government out of touch and frankly out of control.
So did you reach out to some of the government officials, like including the MLA, what they had to say?
There was contact with not necessarily officials, but there was no contact with bureaucracy, but there was contact with MLAs and cabinet ministers. I was in contact with previous transportation minister Rajan Sawhney, I believe twice, but there was never any contact on an official capacity. These would have been cabinet ministers, these would have been MLAs. We know Grant Hunter attended the Coutts blockade. There were others, but there was no official delegation or direction given by the Alberta government, by the Jason Kenney government, to communicate with those in the capacity to represent the Coutts blockade.
Up next, they're known as the Coutts Four. The four men arrested without bail following the Coutts border blockade a year and a half ago. One of them is facing a charge of conspiracy to commit murder of a police officer. After the break, Marco Van Hugenbos sticks up for them, calling them political prisoners. That's next. Keep it right here. There are four men known as the Coutts Four who were arrested near the Coutts border blockade last year, one of them on charges of conspiracy to commit murder. They've not received bail for a year and a half. Well, Marco Van Hugenbos participated in and was arrested for his own involvement in the Coutts protests and has been in contact with the Coutts Four. The Fort Macleod town councillor is speaking out in support of these men, saying it appears they're being held as political prisoners. Here is the second part of his interview.
Now let's talk about the Coutts Four here, Marco. Chris Carbert, Chris Lysak, Jerry Moore, and Anthony Oleanic. In your opinion, why is it that none of them have been granted bail? They've been behind bars for a year and a half now.
In relation to that, if I take the bail situation on its own, considering how lax the bail system and how dysfunctional the bail system is in Canada, the statement that everybody gets bail in Canada is not untrue. Obviously, there's situations where a person wouldn't, but largely most people get bail. If we look at minor criminal or petty crime, or what the government or the Crown deems as petty crime, sometimes the offenders make their way back to their community before the enforcement that brings them in makes their way back to a community. At least that's the case in Southern Alberta. I believe that these men not getting bail, that bail is denied once and twice for some of these men, is a political decision. There's political influence and political interference to make an example, and I believe there's a bigger, I wouldn't call it a conspiracy, but there's a bigger picture at play here that ties back to the Emergencies Act, the implementation of the Emergencies Act. As you know, or if you don't know, I was subpoenaed to testify at the Commission last November. What struck me, considering the emphasis, and some of this is retroactive based on the report that the Commissioner issued this February, based on the report that came out and how Coutts was such a key catalyst to the implementation, like the guns and all the details around Coutts, how that was such a large catalyst to the implementation of the Emergencies Act. I found it very interesting how little focus Coutts received at the Commission.
So Marco, what do you say to the RCMP who say they have overwhelming evidence against the Coutts Four, including 15 firearms that were confiscated, ammunition, and body armor?
At this point, it would be the Crown. I imagine the RCMP would have been involved in that investigation, but I would say to them, present your case. If you have a case, and if it's so cut and dried, what's with the games? What's with the grandstanding? Why the delays? Why are we dragging this out to the point where these men will become eligible for a Jordan application? And to explain on a Jordan application, Jordan versus Canada, I believe there was a case back, I don't know the date, but it established the timelines to a fair and timely trial. And that timeline is 30 months. We are over that halfway mark. And very soon we will approach that deadline. And what I feel may happen due to what's happening in court, pre-trial motions, some of the things in play. But what I see is happening is that the Crown's case is on shaky ground. That's my observation. I'm no legal expert, but that's my observation. I have the ability to discern that. What I think will happen is they will become eligible for a Jordan application. The Jordan application, and this is just a scenario. The Jordan application will go through the course, and these men will be granted. Their charges will be dropped. There will be outcry, broken justice system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But these men will never be truly vindicated, and the Crown, if they had a case, won't try their case. And if they actually never had a case, also will never have to answer to the fact that there is a very real chance of Crown and RCMP corruption. I'm not here to speak to the details of their charges, the details of their cases, what they said, all that. I'm not the judge, I'm not the jury. But where is the justice in this? Justice delayed is justice denied. And in relation to Bill, these men had no priors. These men are not a threat to society.
After the break, Alberta's utility prices have been skyrocketing, but one community fought back against a city council, and it's paid off in a big way. That's next.
And all of a sudden, as people went off their fixed rate, the cost of utilities quadrupled in Medicine Hat.
Over 500 people recently showed up at a rally to complain to city councillors about utility costs in Medicine Hat, Alberta. One restaurant owner saw her bill shoot up to close to $4,000 in 1 month, but it appeared the council listened because just this week, all 9 unanimously approved a $33.1 million cost relief package. Now residents will see some of their hard-earned cash come back to them, but former Cypress Medicine Hat MLA Drew Barnes says the city really needs to look at all of the huge fees that people are paying when it comes to their utility bills. Here's part of my interview with former MLA Drew Barnes. So we've been hearing so much about utility prices rising and going through the roof, haven't we? So, but Medicine Hat City Council just approved, what was it, a $33 million in relief, in utility relief. So this happened just September 5th. So Drew, this is huge news.
It absolutely is huge news, but let's put it in the framework where it started from. First of all, Jeanette, people in Medicine Hat, families in Medicine Hat are hurting. High taxes, high inflation, the economy here and the job market's not great. And all of a sudden, as people went off their fixed rate, the cost of utilities quadrupled in Medicine Hat. Now, we're very fortunate in Medicine Hat that we still generate our own electricity and we have the opportunity to sell to the rest of Alberta on the grid. But the long and the short of it, people's utility bills were tripling and quadrupling at a time they couldn't afford it. And secondly, Jeanette, our city-owned ratepayer-owned utility made $200 million last year. And at the same time, our city council raised our property taxes 4%. So Medicine Hatters are saying, hey, stop this growth in government. Please have some empathy for where I'm at with my family and my future, and give us a break. And city council partly responded with a decision last night to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, Drew, I'm sure a lot of people could applaud City Council for that. And my understanding was there were hundreds of people in attendance there for this council meeting because it really affects them. So what will this mean for these people of Medicine Hat who hold accounts with the city for their
Well,
utilities?
it will be initially. It will be a nice break. Yeah, there was like 550 people at a town hall a week ago, organized by one of our local restaurateurs whose utility bill had gone up to $3,000 a month, and I've seen some other restaurants as much as $10,000 a month now since the rates went up. But what was decided last night was. Every single resident of Medicine Hat and our local service area, which includes Dunmore, Cypress County, and Redcliffe, would also get some relief. And our small to mid-sized businesses would get some relief as well, totaling $33 million. The anxiety and the angst still, Jeanette, though, is that they've decided to defer the decision on what they're going to charge us in the future until their October meeting. And again, as people went off the long-term rates of 8 cents a kilowatt to it was almost 30 cents, Medicine Hatters are still wondering what October, November, and December are going to bring.
Yeah, well, at least it will bring a little bit of relief for them those months because I believe it's $400, a relief payment of $400 on their bill for September, and then $200 in both October and November. So at least that's a little bit of relief. But it looks like also passed on the 5th was an investigation into how the city sets its energy rates. So that was passed as well, wasn't it? Can you maybe talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. The council passed a motion agreeing to look for a consultant, to look for some outside advice as to how they set their rates in the future. Potentially going to a municipally controlled corporation, potentially to look at the opportunity to sell it. Jeanette, one of the interesting things here is about 15 years ago, we had the opportunity to sell the Medicine Hat Oil and Gas Exploration Company for what sounded like hundreds of millions of dollars. The council at the time decided not to do it. And now that business has diminished tremendously in value, and the people of Medicine Hat are facing upwards of $200 million in reclamation costs for wells. So a decision that was made 15 years ago has cost the people of Medicine Hat greatly. And I just hope and pray that council gets this one right. And I hope they listen to Medicine Hatters as to what we want to do.
Coming up next, he was the first Indigenous person to be quoted by the Supreme Court of Canada. His lifetime of accomplishments include some of the most important political achievements for Indigenous peoples in Canada and around the world. Stay with us. We speak with Dr. Leroy Littlebear next.